We all want to grow our businesses, but often get stuck trying to make that happen. This can be especially true for leadership at smaller to medium-sized companies that are trying to scale but struggle to find ways to differentiate themselves in a hyper-competitive market. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome back to A Seat at the Table. In each episode, we sit down with leaders, innovators, authors, and entrepreneurs so that we can learn best practices that will empower our businesses. Today, we're joined by the remarkable Ian Wilby, a founder coach who helps entrepreneurs and senior leaders scale their businesses by fixing what gets in the way of sales, confidence, and decision-making. In this episode of A Seat at the Table, Ian will be discussing why every executive needs a cheerleader or a mentor, the critical value of turning your differences into a superpower, and the one shift executives need to make this year in order to move forward. If you're looking to get this new year off to a fast start, then join me as I sit down with Ian and learn how to power up our business. Ian, it is such a pleasure to have you here on A Seat at the Table. I think the topic that you're going to be discussing with us today is so relevant to people in our industry. A lot of the people who are listening to this podcast are senior executives. And I think that your experience coaching people and understanding the role of mentorship will be very, very relevant to many, many of the people who are listening.
Well, it's an absolute delight to join you today and have this conversation with yourself, Jane.
Well, thank you. Now, as we're diving into this, I think that you touch on the point of confidence, that leadership needs to be confident. Can you explain what that means? I think a lot of people may interpret confidence almost as bravado. How do you see it? What do you advise people?
I think really it's having that sort of fundamental understanding of who you are and how you want to show up. It's funny in life, we go through, I remember when I was a young executive, starting my career in London, and I felt the need to fit into situations and environment and almost become a shapeshifter, Jane. Depending on what the situation was, I'd be that individual or I'd be that character. And it's only as you get older and you become more in tune with who you are and your own North Star, you realize you don't want to operate from that position. You want to operate from a position of, and it's a word that's overly used, which is called authenticity. But it's being your true self. And I think after a while, you begin to realize that, no, this is who I am, and this is how I'm going to show up. And that, for me, is at the core of what confidence is built on, having a clear understanding of what your North Star is.
I think that's so important. And you're right. I think in recent years, perhaps a decade or so, we've sort of lost track of that, right? We've lost our North Star. We've been influenced by so many, you might say, influencers, and people, I think, are needing to get back to sort of first principles in terms of leadership, in terms of personal development. So I'm really glad you brought that up. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, most definitely. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Jane, when you said, we are being influenced by influencers, and we are in that age of influence. And I think one of the things is that, that need to always be on. We're always either checking our emails or checking our mobile phones. But Steve Peters, I don't know if you know, he's a famous sports therapist who wrote a wonderful book called The Chimp Paradox. But he talks about, just having peace of mind and simply being, and putting all those devices away and all those distractions away, and just getting comfortable with sitting in that silence. And that, for me, I think is really, really powerful, and something that we all probably struggle with a bombardment of choice on TV and our mobile phones, or what's coming on, our alerts on our laptops. And I think sometimes it's just great to down tools and just sit in that moment and sit in that silence.
So true. Honestly, you're right. It's almost a luxury to have a few minutes of silence. And I think you don't realize it until you've been in a situation where, for whatever reason, you've been cut off from the internet. Maybe you're on a trip somewhere and you just can't get the connection, or your phone died and you haven't had the time to go and get it fixed. And even in that short amount of time, at first you're frustrated, and then you actually sort of like it, and you almost don't want to turn the phone back on.
Yeah, but we've all had those, those holiday trips where you've gone to the resort and the Wi-Fi doesn't work or you can't get a connection. And at first there's that inherent panic. You believe, oh my goodness, how am I going to survive? What am I going to do? And then after a while, the mind and the body suddenly calibrate and you start to kind of just almost feel this sense of ease wash over you as you just realize, right, well, I can't, there's no point in checking my phone, so there's no update. So I'm just going to either focus on what I'm having for lunch or what's happening by the pool or what the kids are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed myself that checking the phone all the time is anxiety producing because you never know what's going to be on there. And sometimes it's not that bad, but the moment it hits, right, it looks like, oh no, now what? Now what do I have to deal with? What's this new problem? And oftentimes when you look at that mail, it may be not that bad, but it's that instant anxiety. And it's almost like you're getting these shocks throughout the day just by
It
having to
is.
check these things.
It is, Jane, and I'm not. I don't want to become. We have a phrase in England where you become a sober bore, but I
Right.
stopped drinking alcohol about 6 years ago, and it wasn't because I had any. It was more of a lifestyle and a health choice. I just stopped it. But in that journey of stopping it, I kind of almost turned it into a game where I kind of had dominion and control over. I don't need a drink. And then once I'd learned that power of my mind and the control I had over that, I then just adopted the same rationale to my mobile phone and realized, yeah, I can put it in another room and be present with my partner and engage in this program or a discussion or over supper. And then it became a bit of fun rather than that feeling of missing out or what's happened or what's the news or the latest.
Absolutely. I think that's such an important point. And you're right, it's building that internal sense of discipline of basically taking control of your life. Whereas in a sense, as you're saying, we've let these devices control us, and not just the devices, but other things as well. So to get that control back is so important. Now you mentioned the fact that everyone needs a cheerleader. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think when you're on that entrepreneurial journey, it's always good to have someone that you can go to that's because it can be a lonely road. So it's
Yes.
great to have, I say you either have a cheerleader or you have your tribe. And your tribe are those people that you can go to. And when things aren't going well, that they um, are really engaged with you and listening to you and will give you that level of encouragement and support to spur you on because it is a lonely road. And when you're deep in the trenches and you are still, you're miles away from New York, but you still got miles to go to California. You've just
Right.
got to, you've got to have that person that will encourage you to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that someone had played that role in your life. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was when I first moved to because I grew up in the UK in the north of the country, and then I moved as a lot of people do down to the south to London, and I started in an organization in advertising, and I had a senior leader who spotted me and just invested in me and
Mm,
saw that I had raw talent, wasn't particularly polished, but knew that I had something and knew that I had something special. And he took the time to invest in me and encourage me and gave me the confidence to see past my own limits because we all can have those limiting beliefs. And within my coaching, one of the areas I spend a lot of time working with leaders and founders is all around that negative self-talk and limiting belief. And once you can get over that and see it for what it is, which is invariably nonsense, then you can power right through. And if you have a cheerleader, someone that really believes in you, that can see your greatness, because sometimes it's hard to see your own greatness, Jane. It's a wonderful feeling when you have that person that you can call upon at those moments of doubt.
Oh, absolutely. Honestly, that can really be a game changer. And you mentioned that you could have more than one. How would that work?
Well, you can have a when I'm in session with clients, I say, look, build your tribe, and you can have your tribe that congregate around you on issues of business. So there might be someone who has a deep understanding of finance, someone who has a deep understanding of marketing, someone has a deep understanding of sales, but you have your business tribe. Then you might have your personal tribe. That might be a family member, a sister, a relative, an uncle, a close girlfriend, an associate. So it's those people that you can go to when you have a particular challenge, and you can discuss that challenge with them. And that's what I mean. It's really important to build that tribe and have those cheerleaders around you, because I myself for a while thought that I had to have all the answers. Because when you are in senior leadership, you sometimes think, right, I've got to have all the answers. And if you're running a business and you've got a young family, and how you meet that bridge and make it all happen isn't always easy. So it's sometimes great to have in your tribe someone who may have done it, or someone who's dealing with a similar sort of challenges, so you can get collective support as well.
I think that's very true. And I think a lot of people listening to this can definitely relate to feeling that when you do get to a senior level, that you have to have all the answers to everything. I think, at a more junior level, you accept the fact that, okay, you're at a junior level and you're not expected to know everything. But as you move up, there's that onus that says, I need to have the answer. I need to be able to solve every problem. I need to get it right all the time. And that's a very big burden to carry, that I don't really think anybody can ever be right all the time. It pays, as you say, to have somebody who you can consult, who's a sort of a trusted consultant, mentor, confidant, whatever you wish to call it.
I mean, I'm a big sports fan. So, people like John Wooden and Jerry Jones, when you look at any of their readings or musings about team and leadership, and I think even though Jerry Jones has got a bit of a checkered history with the manager whose name escapes me, but I was watching the documentary on Netflix the other day, and he talks about, great leadership is being okay with everybody else taking the credit. And that takes a certain degree of confidence and self-assuredness that you haven't got all the answers. And sometimes it's okay to show that level of vulnerability and say, you know what, I'm coming to you because I know you're a subject matter expert in that area.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Yes, it is. It really is. To be able to identify people like that and to have that relationship with them where you're able to reach out and say, can I just run this by you? And know that they have the expertise, but that they also have your best interests. It's not easy to find people like that necessarily, but you're right. To make an effort to cultivate that kind of relationship, very important. We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sherry. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Very important. I mean, you can probably tell, Jane, I'm a big reader. And I'm a big reader of US books. And every Christmas I get a book. And I've just finished Barry Diller's Who Knew? I don't know if you've read it, but it's a phenomenal. And that's a guy who has got a phenomenal story. Started in the mailroom at one of the big agencies, then went to ABC, then went to Paramount. But he's very honest in terms of knowing his own limitations and surrounding himself with inherent talent and people of real skill, and not being afraid to defer to that talent and say, well, what do you think? And
Right.
unfortunately, we have a kind of an entrepreneurial ecosystem, if you like, that tries to portray it was the one person who had the one idea who took it from 0 to 20 billion. When we all know, well, that's not really the case. I think Jeff Bezos talks about, what he took it so far, but then it's Andy Jassy, I think, has really accelerated it and done some amazing things at Amazon. So you see in leadership, you see real success in those leaders who are very comfortable with saying, yeah, I'm good at this, but I'm not great at that, and I'm okay with that. I'm fine with reaching out for that resource and that support.
Yeah, I think you're right. You need to first be cognizant of the fact that there is a need for these kind of outside mentors, and then at the same time be comfortable enough admitting that you could benefit, right, from getting input from other people. It's true. The narrative is so strong that people have been sort of these one-man bands and built all this themselves, and worse yet, built it overnight. And
Yes,
then
yeah,
when
over
you unpack it,
success.
right? Yeah. And then everybody else is sitting there saying, what am I doing wrong? How come I haven't managed to launch a unicorn over my summer holiday kind of thing? And a lot of people who have perfectly good businesses, very admirable businesses, who I know, and feel like they're failures. And why? Because, they don't have a multi-billion dollar business, and they've only been at it for like 2 years, and they're just like, well, not getting anywhere. I was like, you're kidding. You're doing great. All things considered, right? It's been a short amount of time.
Very much
And
so, Jane. And one of the things I spend a lot of time doing when I'm in session early on in a relationship with the client is just really holding space for them to articulate their journey and seeing how far they've come. I'm a great believer in, if you've, whatever, it doesn't matter the revenue. If you've traded your first year traded, you've submitted your accounts and you've made a profit, you're a hero. I
yeah,
don't care what you say. If you've managed to get through that first year, you've paid all your bills, you've made a profit, you are a hero. But I think
absolutely.
also, I'm a great believer in just holding space so people can really just stop and think about what it is that they've done, because everybody's watching these movie trailers or these snapshots of, I went from this, I found that, and then we list, and then it was a bit, and it's like yeah, that worked for them, but that's not a measure. That's not a measure, and that shouldn't be your benchmark. You need to get clear on what your North Star was and what you see as success, not someone else's measure of success. Because otherwise, if you follow that road, it becomes a false narrative. And invariably, you end up many years down the road thinking, I sacrificed all this. You don't know who your children are, you don't know who your partner is. And then you're asking yourself, what was that all about?
That's so true. And I think that, one of the things that a lot of people are coping with in this day and age is it's sort of a day and age of comparison, whereas I think that people have always compared themselves to others. It's human nature, but I don't think it was as prevalent, probably maybe 2 decades ago or so. I think that in more recent years, it really is a tremendous amount of comparison amongst other people, amongst anything really. And it puts a lot of pressure on people. And like you're pointing out, they're comparing themselves to a story, not necessarily even to a reality.
Well, I think that if you look at and stay with me on this, Jane, but if you look at within the dating market, it's so apparent why we're now in this mindset. In the old days, you'd have gone to school or college, you would have lived in an area, you would have known the certain people, and then there you go, you'd end up dating, get married, and so on. But now there's this expectation where you can have it all because, and you can be this mega superstar because you've got all the tools. And it's quite, when you sit back and look at it, you think that's just quite crazy. Why are we selling that narrative, and where's that narrative coming from?
Well, exactly, exactly. It's great expectations that are usually not met and makes everybody feel badly about themselves and what they're doing and so forth. I think it's important that you brought that up, and I think it's important that people who are, as you say, founders of a business, entrepreneurs, or in leadership positions in businesses they don't own, have that what you might call guidelines, right? That gives them some type of point of reference. You call it a North Star, so that they understand. I mean, oftentimes you don't even know what's good enough anymore. You don't really have a point of reference. A lot of times you find you're working all the time because you don't know how much is enough, right? If you work in a company, they tell you this is what you have to do. You have a sense, but when you are running your own business or you're in a very senior position, there's always more to do. So you just figure you got to keep doing it, right? And you get to the point where you never stop.
Absolutely. Clayton Christensen, the godfather of innovation, wrote a wonderful book. I think it's called, and what I will do is I will send you a reference of all these books I've talked about.
Oh,
But he wrote
perfect.
a book, and I think I think the book's called A Life Well Lived. And
Mm,
all the book is he talks about in the book, and this was a hugely successful. I think he was a Stanford professor. He launched a load of unicorns. But his focus of the book was, when you look back on your life, what do you want to be able to say? What did
right,
you stand for? And I think that's one of the questions I challenge my clients to think about. When you look back, when you reflect, what do you want to say? Well, Ian Wilby, as a leader, as a business professional, as an entrepreneur, I stood for this.
right,
That's what was important for me. And it wasn't important to them and it wasn't important to her, but it was important to me. And I stood by it and I'm okay with it. Because I think you've got to stand for something, because that comes back to foundation and confidence and what you want to be and how you want to show.
I think that's very true. And if you do send over that book list, I will put that, I'll link it in the description section here so that everybody listening can download it. So if you want to get Ian's book list, it'll be there for you. If you're watching this on YouTube, it'll be in the description area. And if you are listening to it as a podcast, it'll be in the show notes. So yes, that's something to look forward to. Now, meanwhile,
Definitely.
you talk about turning difference into a superpower. I think that's really an interesting point because, in a sense, we were brought up, to be proud of our differences, but at the same time, oftentimes, as we talked about, with so many people out there setting up as influencers, it's hard to not want to bend to some of the personalities or whatnot, or personas, you might say, that are being put out there. How do you see that?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. And at a time where we've been through the pendulum of diversity and inclusion has gone one way and then it's gone another way. I think for me, it comes back to that point I was making earlier, Jane, in terms of what you want to stand for as a person. For me, as I was going to say a young man, I'm not young anymore, unfortunately, but I was born in a household of women. My father worked away a lot. I was different. I lived in a community where I just looked different. I moved to the south of the country where I sounded different. And through that journey, I used to think about fitting in. As I got older, I suddenly realized that difference was a real benefit. And it really then started to tell me about being more aligned with who I am and what I stand for. So if you like, the tip of the spear isn't the difference, the tip of the spear is becoming aligned and becoming
Right.
clear on who you are, what you stand for, and what's important to you. And I think because I've done a lot of work with female senior leaders, and they've often talked about challenges in certain environments, certain industries. And I've always encouraged them. I've always asked one question: are you any good? And they'll go,
Right.
what do you mean? I'm like, doesn't matter all the other stuff. Are you any good at what you do your core Yeah, I'm the best. I'm the right. Focus on that. All the rest is about the other side of other people that's their your issue is, can you deliver on what your promise, your brand proposition, your value, your core competence? Focus on that, and that's all that's what will get you through.
That's so important. And I think it's really great that you framed it that way, because oftentimes you do get caught up in thinking about all the superficial things, right? Am I dressing the right way? Am I acting the right way? Am I being perceived in the right way? And when it really comes down to it, the only thing that matters is, can you get the job done? Can you deliver on certain promises or expectations? And I think it's important that you pointed that out. Um, what other tips might you have for people who are, like you said, capable, but they're stuck?
They're stuck. Wow, that's a great question. Capable but stuck. I think I think the first thing to do is to look at people who you, and this doesn't need to be famous people or celebrity people, just people in your orbit. Who do you look at and think, wow, they're doing something that's interesting. How are they doing it? And think about approaching them and having a
Right,
conversation. Because Jane, 9 times out of 10, that person you admire went through a similar fear. Do you know what
right.
I mean? They'll have gone through, and they may still even be in that fear and be amazed that you've asked them. But I think the thing that would be the first thing I would say would be, look for individuals or find environments where you can move yourself forward. So we have something called Toastmasters, which is a community group for people that want to do public speaking. So if you're fearful of public speaking, you know you've got to do more of it, then find that, then go to an environment where it's a safe environment where you can
Right.
learn and skill up. But there is never, we've never lived in a time where there hasn't been an inordinate amount of resource and free resource to succumb any barrier or any narrative that you are telling yourself in your head. There has never been a better time or more resource where you can overcome that.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I think, if you choose wisely, you can
Yeah.
find a tremendous amount of resources out there. It's sometimes difficult because we have an abundance of riches, you might say. So you have to be able to sort through everything that's available online and try to first get through all of that. But I think, hearing from people like yourself who are experienced mentors, who've been through a lot of things on their own and can share that experience, it's very meaningful for people just to know that there's somebody else out there, right? That
Mm.
can see things from your point of view because they've been through it, can
Yeah.
alone be very reassuring.
Yeah, yeah. When you're on your own, it is. But that's why I always come back to your North Star,
Right.
and finding that North Star might be woven in there, might be a parent that had a big impact, might be a teacher that had a big impact, might have been an athletic coach that had a big impact. But look at those people that said, yeah, that what they stood for really. And then when you look at those values, those qualities, envelope them over people that you're thinking about engaging with and thinking about, um, you know, I think it's Oprah, and I think she nicked it from Maya Angelou. When what is it? When people show you who they are, believe them because that's who they are. So
Right.
just become
Right.
attuned. So just become attuned to that and think about, right, okay, yeah, this person's displaying those behaviors. So yeah, they're someone I want to engage with. They're displaying the wrong bit. No, I don't really want to, because there are there's a great phrase I read in another book. Our words and actions betray us. And
Mm.
if you were to say to me, Ian, what's the one skill you would say to any leader or founder or entrepreneur to really double down on? And I would have to say it's active listening. Become an
Interesting.
active listener, because what people don't realize, and what I'm about to say will sound, at first you'll think, well, that sounds kind of stupid, but People don't realize when they speak, they are really sharing their thinking. And if you listen carefully, people don't realize what they're actually giving away. And that's why I like that phrase, our words and actions betray us, because they really do tell you. If you are an active listener, they will really tell you what the other person is really going on in their head.
Wow,
If that
that's
makes
such
sense.
great advice. Yeah, it's great advice. And I think that it's something that it takes a certain amount to discipline yourself to be cognizant of that. Because too often we're listening, but we're also in our minds thinking of other things, right? And thinking about the next thing we want to say, or in a sense, thinking about what that person's saying and then either debating it or agreeing with it. But we're not just listening and taking it all in. So I think it's really wonderful that you brought that up.
Oh, very much so, because we begin to see conversation like tennis. So you speak and
Yes.
then I speak and you
Good
speak and then I
analogy.
speak. And we don't realize, no, it's an information exchange. We're exchanging thoughts and opinions. So if we
Right.
slow it down, we'll digest and receive even more.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a very good, and I like that. I think you framed that very, very well. Now, Ian, I want to thank you so much for sharing so many great insights here with us on A Seat at the Table. It's really been fantastic to be able to talk to you. Certainly, I will put your contact information in the show notes, in the contact area, the description area for this, if you're seeing it on YouTube. I would encourage anybody who is listening to this, reach out to Ian. I think he's got a tremendous amount to share.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking to you, Jane. And I think this podcast series is absolutely fantastic. I have listened to a number of your guests, and they're all delivering great insight and unique perspectives. So all power to you.
Well, thanks again, and wishing you and everyone listening to this a fantastic 2026. We're in the middle of January, so the year is rapidly getting underway. Thanks for helping kick off the year. Thanks for being with us here today on A Seat at the Table. If you'd like to see some of the other episodes, head on over to our podcast website at seat.fm. That's SEAT.fm. There's also a link here in the show notes. And if you're thinking that you'd like to be a guest on the show, you'll find information on how to apply there as well. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Jane Singer, and I will see you in the next episode.